have Paul from Verizon coming up next. Before I introduce Paul and his talk, one thing that was made aware to me while I was sat down here was someone in the room phoned me. Thankfully, I had my phone on mute. I didn't mention at the beginning of the session, could you please put your phones on mute? So if anyone hasn't, would you please do so now? Okay, our second talk is from Paul. Paul will be talking about the world of computer crime and espionage. Very good, very interesting. Paul.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Thanks everyone. I heard that stream 1 is the cool stream, and I can see many more beards and jeans in this room than the average. So I'm very pleased to be here. Here we go. So just to give you a bit of background about Verizon and what we do. If you've been to the US, you've probably heard of Verizon as a wireless carrier. I work for the Verizon risk team. So we're the investigative arm of Verizon. We work in the security services practice, and we carry out all manner of different types of investigations for data breach investigations for organisations, including payment card, IP targeted attacks, APT type attacks, you name it. Cybercrime is a very big area, and we help a lot of organisations with that. 10 years ago, Verizon decided to take the step of starting to share a lot of the information we were seeing, and collate it and really kind of lead the charge, I guess, in terms of sharing data breach investigation trends and data to help organisations to mitigate those risks. I'm the investigations manager for the EMEA risk team. And I come from a law enforcement background, investigating serious and major crime. Many of the people in our team come from either government, law enforcement, or consulting backgrounds, and we usually have the pleasure of saying to customers at the end of our engagements that we hope we never see them again. So just to fill you in a bit. Anyone in the audience here familiar with the Data Breach Investigations Report and has come across it before? I've got quite a few hands here. That's great to see. The 2014 report is going to be released in the next few weeks, so please stand by. I can't tell you any specific information that's going to be in that report, but I've got information that will be included in it, bundled in with the last 10 years of data. So you're going to see some new information today, but please stand by. That report's coming out fairly soon. So this is the sixth, we're entering now the 7th consecutive year of publishing this report. Last year's report had 621 confirmed breaches, which were studied and the information provided. And it's 10 years of collecting data and bringing it all together to show how organisations actually get breached. So I guess rather than what you hear in the news, all the different news headlines about how organisations get breached, these are the findings of actual investigation firms and other contributors who've actually carried out detailed forensic examinations to find out the root causes and understand what can be done to mitigate them. So it gives you much more of an accurate perspective about how breaches occur and what can be done. So 2013 report, these are the contributors that we had. We've got a lot of different organisations joining all the time to help add data to the data set, to help normalise it and provide a lot of more perspective in terms of the different organisations and their backgrounds. So you'll see that there's a lot of European contributors. We're increasing that all the time. Each year we're about doubling to tripling the number of contributors. So the point of this report is really listed up there in red. It's identifying how, who, why, and what with regards to actual data breach incidents. What I can disclose to you today is the 2014 report. We've vastly increased the number of contributing organisations. There's many more CERT teams that have come on board. There's many private sector organisations. And you probably noticed a number of names for organisations you work for here as well. So we're very, very happy to have these contributors. It's really helping to promote information security sharing. And that's really what this is all about. It's about sharing information on threats. We're all on the same side and helping our customers defend against the threats that are emerging. So the point of the report, as I mentioned, it's about not just looking at what can possibly go wrong, but it's looking at what actually went wrong in organisations that led to a breach. It's very easy to look, when you have your pen testing report, for example, you guys are mostly all in the preventative pen testing type side, traditionally with CREST, looking at all the possible things that could possibly be exploited in an organisation to affect a breach of security or data. This is more of a study of what actually went wrong. What were the most likely areas and ways that attackers actually got into a network? It helps organisations to target the very limited security resources that they have in the most effective areas for their industry groups. So in order to do this, what the Verizon risk team did originally was to put together a framework that allows for the sharing of information amongst different organisations. And it doesn't have to be just shared with Verizon, it can be shared amongst different organisations of different industry groups. And it's a way to anonymise and share incident data to collect metrics on it and make use of it without having the risks of disclosing sensitive information about customers and so on. There's two initiatives which Verizon runs. One is the private collection from our partners, which we use to put together to form this report. But what was a great initiative from last year, and what we're hoping to get a lot more momentum with, is the VERIS community database. There's a link down the bottom here, veriscommunity.net, and we've also got the whole framework made available on GitHub there. On the VERIS community net, we have a community database of data breaches for all publicly disclosed breaches. So those that have made it into the papers and so on. It gives organisations a chance to put the information there, and all of the actual metrics that those that are behind that data is stored on GitHub. You can download it and you can run it through whatever tools you want to. So that's we encourage organisations, particularly if they have something that's publicly disclosed, that their organisation has gone through all the pain, contribute back into the security community and categorise the risks and so on behind that breach and upload it into the community database. It's going to help to improve everyone's overall understanding of security threats. So now for some actual data. So who gets attacked? And I think it's probably no surprise. This is a pretty good way to have a look at the spread of industry groups. This is the standard IISP industry classification in the US. So organisations fit into these different standardised classifications. And so here you can see along the left-hand side, we've got the size of the organisation. Sometimes or often, our partners or so on may not know the actual size of an organisation that's been investigated, or they may not have recorded it. So you'll see along the bottom there is an unknown size. But altogether, you can see the total spread of industries and those that are being targeted the most, according to all the different contributors into the data set. So no surprises there. You're going to see the finance sector kind of leads the way with breaches. They're the ones that have the money, right? They're the ones that are the targets. Retail sector, you'll see just to the left of centre, is also a very high target. And then on the right-hand side, we've got some that might be a bit more of a surprise. The accommodation sector, but also the public sector is huge. Now, this graph actually cuts out a lot of the public sector incidents. This year's report, there'll be a lot more public sector data because we have so many more contributors coming on board that are giving us a lot more public sector type breaches. And that mostly comes down to the fact that there's mandatory disclosure. Mandatory disclosure is really going to have an impact across Europe as the mandatory disclosure laws start to roll across. The European Commission's implementation of those regulations and the way that those filter out into all the different sovereign law is going to start to really have a big impact on reporting. So, so we're interested to see this data set grow and become more and more complete over the years. So who are the attackers? This is a graph of the last 10 years of data, all collected together. And what you'll see is we've got the really big blue one here is all of the external threats. Green, which is the one just below it, is the internal. And then partners is the tiny little line just along the bottom there. So you see the only year in the history of collecting DBI data that insider threats had a majority was in 2007. After that, external threats really eclipsed everything. And interestingly, there's this big dip in 2012 of external threats. From what we can tell, that's mostly due to a real drop in multi-target attacks that happened across the 2011 time period, and the subsequent arrest of some of the organisations. So last year we had 27 arrests of Romanians involved in mostly SME type breaches happening across the US and Australia predominantly. So that really had a big impact. It's great to see when law enforcement gets involved and we get a lot of arrests, we see a big dip, but unfortunately you can see it's back again. But this sort of graph really helps organisations to see, okay, where are the threats? There's a lot of perceptions that insiders are a huge threat in organisations, and we have Snowden and other types of insider disclosures that really make the headlines. But when we look at the types of incidents that make it to any of the contributing organisations that contribute to this report, so i.e. it gets really serious, it's not just a thumb drive getting lost or someone's stealing a customer list, but it becomes serious enough to be investigated by a third party. It's external threats. They're the ones that are getting investigated. And they're the ones that are really posing a major threat to organisations. So who are the attackers? Well, I mean, what's really interesting from last year's report is we started to really split out and understand the different types of threats and the different metrics involved in different types of attackers. So, I mean, as mentioned in the previous talk, the activist ideology-based attacks can be one that's quite public. And what we find is that this is the one that's kind of the most misconstrued in terms of organisations' understanding of the real threat profile to their organisation. Activist-type attacks have high impact. They make it into the news because the objectives of the organisation or the attackers is to really attack an organisation's reputation, to disrupt their business, to make it as public as possible. So these are the ones that always end up in the news, but they make up a very, very small percentage of the overall mix of actual breach investigations that are carried out. What makes up the bulk is the cyber criminals, those that are motivated by financial gain. They're much more targeted. They're much more calculated. They're using much better tradecraft generally. The activist type attacks tend to be fairly opportunistic. And then we have our spies along the bottom here. Now the last two are clearly not trying to be found. They're trying to be quiet and fly under the radar. These are the ones that are much more common, but they also don't make the headlines. So organisations tend to see the top one as the highest threat, but the bottom two are the ones that actually make up the bulk of all of the investigations work that's done. Of course, along the middle there, people start to notice through financial fraud, auditing and so on, when money starts to go missing. But when information's lost, who raises a red flag about it? These are the ones that really are difficult to detect and go for a long time without being picked up. So when we have a look at the motivations and understand the mix of motivations of different types of attacks, this is what we see. And we gain this by looking at what sort of information is being targeted and what we can determine from attribution from the attackers. And I want to mention, when we talk about attribution, what we try and encourage any of the contributing organisations to the DBIR to do with regards to attribution is to, as much as possible, identify multiple points of attribution before making any judgment as to the source or origin of an attack. So, for example, if you have a web server that's been taken down and you've got a bunch of Chinese IP addresses, okay, that's one point. You start to look at the control panels that were uploaded. There might be a PHP control panel. It's all written in Mandarin. You have to be able to read Mandarin to interpret it. And then there's a bunch of log files that you can see the strange characters in, and they're characters from ASCII that relate back to Chinese characters. Okay, you start to build multiple points of attribution. Now, it may not be state-sponsored, but at least you've got to the point of understanding that the point of origin is China. So looking at these graphs, they're quite interesting to see the trends. You know, throughout the history of our reporting, financial related crime, financially motivated cybercrime has been the number one. But you can see it's on a very clear downward path. On the left-hand side, we have in terms of percentages what we're seeing. So the percentages of espionage-related attacks are certainly on the increase and on the upward trend. In the last year, we saw a bit of a change in direction or a slowing down, but nevertheless, on average, espionage-related attacks are increasing and increasing all the time. So it'll be interesting to see if and when those two converge and we see the threats equalise. So on the right-hand side, you have in terms of the total number of breaches, espionage, financial-related and ideology-related. In terms of the breadth is the number. Or the number of incidents. So what we're seeing is that still, you know, financially motivated is the leader by far, but we're seeing an increasing percentage of espionage-related attacks as time goes on. No big surprises, I guess, to most of you in the audience, but it's interesting to see this playing out in the actual data. And in terms of attribution, where they come from, this is a great graph because it shows the motivation of the attackers in the different shades of green, but it also shows the points of origin that they've been tracked back to. So we can clearly see the champions at the top here being China, related to espionage-related information assets being targeted. And then moving down, in terms of financially motivated attacks, we have Romania, and then the United States. Scoring number 3 position there. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that the attackers are necessarily situated in that country, but that's where the attribution gets back to in terms of a point of origin for the breach. So regardless of whether you sit on one side of the fence or the other as saying, oh, the Chinese government's behind all espionage-related attacks, at least seeing that as far as the evidence goes, the point of origin in terms of entry into your networks is from China. It helps you to really position your security and understand which strategy and how you're going to address risks to the organisation. So really interesting to see the mix. And you know, if you don't have business with some of these countries necessarily, then you may be able to structure your security approach and your posture to look for traffic leaving to these sorts of regions. So what to worry about? I mean, how are these breaches actually occurring? And what we also come across, you know, I guess in the industry in terms of misconception is that malware is the number one threat. It's always the way that organisations get breached. But when we actually carry out the investigations work and go back and look at how, you know, what activities happened on the systems before the malware was actually introduced into an environment, is that there's hacking at the root of it. And going back through the stats now and looking across 10 years of data, it's really interesting to see that around 2009 there was this real divergence that hacking and just exploiting vulnerabilities in systems, gaining remote access through bad remote access credential controls and so on, it just took off. And if you're an attacker in a network, it's great if you get access first and then you deploy whatever malware where you want to. Now, these aren't mutually exclusive. These are all threat actions that are involved in a breach. So you get crossover. You get social. What's going You get social mixed in with malware, right? So someone can send an phishing email. It results in malware being loaded onto a system, and that's how the compromise occurs. But I think what many organisations don't realise is that hacking is so high. It is such a high percentage of breaches have this hacking component in them, and are usually the root cause. Now this is a great graph. It kind of splits out the entire DBIR in terms of what sort of organisation and what threat and how attacks are carried out. So what we can see here is along the left-hand side we have. Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to break for 1 second. We've got a few people coming in. Okay. Yeah. Okay, it's just we've just got a few people coming into the presentation because we've got a little bit of an overlap in the times. So I might just quickly summarise on the findings from. Do you want me to go back a couple? Yeah, I'm going to go back a couple of slides and show you some more of the juicy stuff. I won't linger. So for those who just came in, welcome. This is the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report summary and summary of the last 10 years of data that we've collected. So welcome. I'm just going to quickly go over some of the slides we've been through with the audience, just to fill you in quickly. But come and see me afterwards if you'd like a bit more detail, and I'll be happy to go over it with you. So looking at who the attackers are, what we've got here is a list, a graph that shows us where the threats come from, whether they're external to an organisation, whether they're internal, or whether they're partner related. What are the where are the threats coming from? So you see here, there's by far organisations that get breached are getting breached from external entities. As I mentioned just previously, there is overlap. Sometimes an insider is involved as well as an external entity, so they show up twice. They're not mutually exclusive of each other. But by far, organisations need to understand that the threats predominantly come from outside. And just to reiterate, the data that goes into this report and this data set comes from all the different contributing organisations. So for it to end up in this data, it has to get out to an organisation that carries out an investigation. So it has to get out to a CERT group, it has to get out to a government organisation, it needs to go to a private consulting firm to carry out a professional forensic investigation of how the incident occurred, and then it has to be categorised according to the VERIS framework and shared with Verizon to make its way into this data set. So you're not going to see things like someone lost their Android phone and may have resulted in some data loss if it doesn't make its way to get investigated in some way. Now just to also reiterate, internal doesn't necessarily mean internal malicious. Internal could be a misconfiguration from an admin. It could be someone losing something accidentally, or carrying out some action that has led to a breach of data that has resulted in that. Looking at this graph, we're looking at the main motivations of attackers. So we can see here on the left-hand side is a percentage of breaches and their root causes, or the motivations of the attackers. Sorry. So what we've seen over the years is a decline in terms of percentage of breaches of financially motivated attacks, and a steady increase over time, although there's a few ups and downs, as you can see in the dotted line. The trends are overall increasing espionage-related breaches, being targeting information in organisations rather than having a financial motivation. Along the bottom is what people perceive as the biggest risk for their organisations often, which is the hacktivism ideology-based breaches. And those really rank very, very low. They come up infrequently, although they're almost always investigated because they're high profile. So you would expect an oversampling of that type of data, but it really has a very small representation. And this is always a favourite, which is the point of origin for attacks. So in the light green along the top there, or the medium coloured green, it's always a little bit difficult to distinguish the shades, but you can see the main motivation for the top group there is espionage related, and comes almost exclusively from China as a point of origin. And then beyond that, we have a lot of the financially motivated breaches which come from Eastern Europe and the United States itself. And quickly and briefly, just going over this one, we have the actual threat actions that are behind those breaches. So we have in 2009, we have this divergence of hacking. Hacking and malware were very closely related. We'd see hacking and malware all the time. And now we see much more just hacking. No malware needs to be installed in an environment. It could just be admin tools. It could be just use whatever's in the environment to execute a breach. Leave the malware at home. Or malware is just associated with the phishing type incidents. So really, it's keeping your systems patched, keeping your credentials managed, all those other security controls that are important, other than just malware, are really important in keeping that top threat out of your network. And this one, just as people are coming in, so I think we're good here. But what you can see here, I mean, what's interesting is you can pick out any industry group from the data breach investigations report and understand what are the key threats. So say if we're going to pick one out and we're going to say, hey, I'm in the manufacturing or professional service area, what are my main threats? Well, information is your core asset. So here's our targeted assets down here that are leveraged in an attack. Most of the attacks come from China. Whether, again, as I said, whether it's whether you're on one side of the fence or the other in terms of the Chinese government involvement, the source of the attack is usually linked back to China as a region. The types of techniques that are used are here, and then in terms of the actual data that's lost, trade secrets, organisational data, credentials, system information. So it's really useful to start to understand for your organisation what are the core risks. And what I try and do with organisations is go through these, understand what the main threat actions are, and go through and look at the SANS top 20 and work out what security controls they need to mitigate the main risks for their organisation. You can spend forever trying to go through SANS top 20 and implement everything, and it costs a lot of money. Or you can do it in a more targeted way. And this is a way to do it based on actual breach data. How other organisations like yours got taken over. So if we're going to have a look at something like, say, a threat action like phishing through social engineering. So looking at that, I mean, what we can see from the data breach investigations report, the vector for social actions are predominantly email for large organisations. Large, over 1,000 employees, small is under 1,000, and then you've got the overall there. So you can see it's predominantly espionage related for large organisations in the shading, and email is still the core vector for doing that. So we actually had one of the contributors last year who ran a mock phishing campaign against a number of their customers, and put together this fantastic graph, which is called the inevitability of the click. So if you send out an email campaign, a malicious email campaign, how many emails does it take before someone in a typical organisation will click on it and open an attachment? And what they found is that by the time you get to about 8 to 10 emails, you've got almost a 95% success rate. So that is the scale, that's the scope of an actual phishing campaign required to be successful in an organisation. So how are your strategies going to detect a campaign, a phishing campaign that's as small as 8 emails? Most solutions are looking for trends in terms of large amounts of emails going out to multiple recipients and so on. But this is really all that's required. And so this is one I know that the team considered whether to release or not, because it's, it's pretty you don't want too many people to know about this, but we figured the bad guys already know this, right? So it's good for you to all know it as well. That's the kind of how easy it is to get into an organisation and start getting employees to click on things and open attachments. When we have a look at the type of data that's being stolen from organisations across 10 years of data, it gives us a really interesting picture. So we see along the left-hand side here, we've got banking information and payment card data on the left. And really for the first time now in the history of 10 years of collecting data, has payment card data not been the majority of actual data that was being stolen. We now have much more of a normalisation across different types of assets in organisations, and the trends to steal personal information, credentials, internal corporate information, and also trade secrets is all increasing. And payment card data itself, I think partly due to Europe and other regions implementing chip and PIN, US is another story of course still, but what we're seeing is that other types of information are becoming monetised, marketable and targeted more and more. So it's important to understand, okay, what are the core assets, where are the main risks in your organisations and your customers' organisations, what needs to be protected the most? Where should you be focusing security investment? So, and what seems really interesting as well is that it's not just payment card data, it's banking related information as well. We're seeing more and more organisations that are having their accounts payable departments and their billing departments being targeted by organised crime. Of course, crypto locker is going to be featured in here as well, which is a fantastic piece of malware. Maybe that's the wrong way to describe it, but very, very well implemented, let's say. So looking at the time span of events, and this is probably the most depressing statistic that I'm going to have to show you today. I might end on a slightly more positive note than this one, but this is the time span of events in terms of the number of incidents or the percentage of incidents that are compromised within days, and the number that are discovered within days. So what we can see is that there's this increasing trend of networks that are compromised within days of an attacker targeting an organisation. It's nearing 100% in terms of time frame that it takes to take an organisation over once an attacker starts targeting them. But the discovery is really not keeping up. In fact, in the last year, it's really dropped down in terms of the ability for organisations to pick up within days that they've actually been breached. There's just not the discovery happening on track with the speed of taking networks over. So this is a bit of a wake-up call, because there's a real need to bring this discovery, someone's in your network, up here as well, right? Organisations need to be discovering within days of their network being breached that they have an attacker in there. The next category up from that is months. Okay, so that's slightly better, but still then you start getting onto years that attackers are in an organisation before they're discovered. Now when we go in and do an investigation, we figured all this out just by looking at their log files, going through and seeing all the evidence that's there in their network that they had the opportunity to find. Now, of course, it's easier to get retrospectively come in and say, oh, look, it's all here, you know, da-da-da-da-da. It's another thing to act on it. But you know, more and more we see organisations that have security products implemented, that the alerts are there, but they're not acting on them. They're not doing something about them when they see them, and escalating the real risks to their organisation. It kind of gets lost in all the noise, and I'm sure you're all aware of those sorts of problems in organisations. But it seems like a lot of organisations, they just have this issue where they won't make the decision to say, yes, we actually have a real problem, we need to investigate now. We need to just take it away from this kind of, okay, close the ticket, close the ticket, close the ticket, to actually, okay, this is a risk, let's do something. Let's go in and escalate this, investigate more, find out what happened, and then we can bring our detection rates up higher. In terms of the difficulty of compromise, it's really not that hard. Now, I'm sure most of you, this is not a surprise to you, right? Like most of you are in the pen testing type areas, so you know that there's a lot of vulnerabilities out there and it's difficult. What plays out in the actual statistics is what you would expect. The types of breaches are in the very low and low categories. So that basically means that there's no specialized knowledge or tools that are developed that are unique in order to do it. It's all generic point and click type basic breaches. We're talking about SQLI is still like one of the #1 causes of breaches of information. And what's that, like 11 years approaching now in terms of a threat? So, I mean, it really doesn't take a lot of effort. When you start looking at espionage related, the skill levels increase, and then, you know, those that involve, you know, very custom targeted malware, targeted attacks against organizations that require a high level of sophistication are tiny. You know, they practically don't even register. So again, I mean, remember that this comes across a data set that comes from a very broad range of government and defence organisations across the globe. So we're not talking about, you know, your everyday run-of-the-mill breaches. We're talking about a lot of breaches of organisations that are very high-profile, large organisations, government organisations. Still, this is the what's behind the data. So basics, you know, get onto the SANS top 20, start implementing basic security controls. They're the types of messages we want to get out to organisations. It's not very sexy, but it's the truth. This is how organisations fall over, time and time again. Now, this is my positive slide to end on. What this is showing is actually the discovery methods and the improvements. So our big green dip here is fraud detection. Fraud detection is becoming less and less of a mechanism for discovery of a breach, but it's still a fairly static one. So this is percentages, and the number of, you know, fraud detection is still a good way to pick up on financially motivated fraud, but its representation in terms of detection is coming down further and further. What we're really encouraged to see is to see law enforcement and unrelated third-party disclosures increasing significantly. Internal's even doing a bit better. But the cooperation of different organisations to help do disclosures, to help notify organisations when they have a breach is really starting to have an impact and start to really have a positive effect on a lot of organisations. So we really encourage everyone, if you come across any information of another organisation being breached, we encourage you to share it, get in touch with those organisations, make proper disclosures, help everyone lift up security in the industry. So you see here we've got the trend data. You can see the actual dotted lines, which are the actual stats, go up and down a bit, but the trends are great to see. So we really encourage law enforcement and all you third-party security organisations that are coming across other organisations that have breaches, doing those disclosures. It's really, really good to see. So that's all I'm going to touch on today. The 2014 report comes out in a few weeks. Follow the Twitter feed. You'll see it there. You'll see it on Verizon's website. You'll hear all about it, I'm sure, soon. But we're very, very excited to have about 50 contributors in this year's report. 95 countries will be covered. And we're really looking forward to sharing that information and helping industry protect itself better. So thank you very much, everyone, for your time. Yep.
Okay. Do we have any questions for Paul? No questions. Wow. Okay.
There's got to be some. Yes.
Hi Paul, my name's Dave Marcel. Thank you for an enlightening prequel to what will be an interesting report next month, I assume. One of the things I noticed from your slide deck was something that reminded me of a tense spring. And that tent spring was the Chinese attitude to financials. So if you put that slide back up, you'll see the thing I mean, whereby everyone else in the world is at it. And there can only be one reason, because in this country, hackers that aren't state-sponsored are subject to the death penalty. So why is there so little financial? Bearing in mind, because we're next to the LSE, Scott Borg, who's part of the Office for Cyber Consequences Unit, the Obama think tank, predicted at Winschwatu's equivalent to DEFCON earlier this year that for the next 3 years it'll be the financials, and he predicted some of the Bitcoin type Mt. Gox failures. But more worrying will be if that Chinese strategy changes. What do you think we'll see?
Well, I mean, we're in a position now where China UnionPay is moving big time into the international market. Chinese tourist dollars are moving out, and we're seeing a lot more integration of I guess, the Chinese financial system with the rest of the world. But previously, it's been quite isolated and segregated. The Chinese financial and payment card environment has been quite separate. PCI essentially doesn't exist in China. And we know we've worked with some organisations to get in and do some investigations in China, and it's extremely difficult to do so. It's essentially illegal to carry out an investigation in China. So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question as to why there's so little financially motivated crime that comes from China. But I'd say there's a number of contributing factors which you can explain. I'd say the main reason that North America is number 3 on the list there is that if you are targeting payment card data in the United States and you're attacking from the United States, you're a lot less likely to be detected. There's much more controls around payment card related data. Organisations are much more focused on protecting their data based on regional access and so on. So I think over time that has promoted more protection in terms of regional access and therefore a lot more targeting from the country that is being, targeting from the country that also has the victims in it. But we see Eastern Europe still having a huge influence here because I guess it's a legacy of time. There's organised crime groups there that have been working for a very long time and have large organisations. They're making more and more money, and I guess it's like any organisation that gets bigger and bigger, it becomes exponentially larger, and it's competition, I guess. But it's also more difficult to get the money back into China, I guess, in terms of financially motivated crime. The
large-scale crash a market, like we've seen with Bitcoin, you can crash a market, and Scott's specific thing is in the next 3 years. Sorry, I'm thinking more of the crash a market type attacks. So we've seen Mt. Gox go down, Bitcoin crashed. That's a tiny thing. We don't really know who really set up Bitcoin. Is it the potential that we will see a very important stream of attacks in the next 3 years?
It's one thing we've learned from 10 years of analysis of breach-related data is that it's very difficult to predict the future. So I wouldn't really hazard to guess what's to come. I mean, it's one thing we're noticing more and more is that the source countries that are involved in breaches is increasing and increasing. More and more countries are I guess, getting on the bandwagon of they see states and countries that are getting away with cybercrime year after year after year without really any negative impact, and Romania is an exception to that because there's been some fantastic records of arrests in the last year. But many other countries are getting away with this, and I think most governments are seeing that some countries are benefiting quite well from cybercrime, and they're getting away with it. And why not jump on the bandwagon and continue on with that? Yeah.
How much of your stats is a function of the country in which you investigate? Because you mentioned it's difficult to investigate in China. Is this
Right.
a function of Western world investigations from Eastern world and financially motivated crime in Eastern Europe targets?
Yes, it certainly.
Is this representative of global crime?
So it's representative of yeah. I'll summarise your question. The question was is the data set representative of the true global threats to organisations across the globe, or is it just representative of where the actual investigations were carried out? And that's where year by year we've tried to add more and more contributors from countries across the world. So we have contributors from many countries: Australia, Japan, Malaysia, all across Europe, and of course the Americas is in there is quite heavy. I guess the answer is, where more investigations work and information sharing occurs, of course more of that data ends up in this report. I'd counter that by saying, well, if the organisations you either work for or work with are likely to work with a contributor to investigate, you are represented in this data set. If you operate within regions where where cybercrime is an issue and it gets investigated and shared, your risks are included within this set of data. So, I mean, of course, there's always bias in every set of data, and it's important to understand. So that's where, I guess, in the report each year we list out who the contributors are, the organisation or the regional coverage of all of the victims, and the victims are not they're not all North America, and they're not all they do have distribution in hotspots. So there is quite a lot of investigations work that happens in North America, but it's turning into much more of a regional and global report with organisations including CERT teams from all over the world contributing data into the report. So, I guess the answer to the question is that yes, there's bias, but it's becoming more and more representative every year. And what we're really hoping to do is to make it so much more representative and normalised that it means everything to pretty much every organisation in each industry group. Okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure whether there's an elephant in the room here, but the reference to espionage, all these stats are about breaches that are known and that have been published by your questionnaires.
Let me respond. That's almost the vast majority of data that's represented here in this report is from breaches that are not publicly disclosed.
Okay. And is this 2013 or is this 2014? Is this last year's that we're still going through, or is it yet to publish?
What I've included here is all the graphs which are in green here are from the 2013 report, and those which are like this one cover the whole 10-year data set, including 2013's data.
The thing that it obviously doesn't represent is anything post Edward Snowden, so to speak. So China is at the top in terms of espionage, but
right,
there's that sort of elephant in the room that we know that there are other breaches out there that are committed by other powers, so to speak, that don't seem to be represented in these charts.
Sure. So, I mean, stats that are from the 2013 report reflect 2012 and preceding breaches. But these graphs, like this one here, include 2013 data. Okay.
Yeah.
So that covers last year. Last year is Snowden. Okay. But unless, for example, the Snowden incident is investigated by an organisation that's one of our contributors and contributes the metrics from that investigation into this report, it won't be here.
Yeah.
So if it's investigated by a government organisation that is in the secret, I'm not going to share anything with the rest of the security community category, you won't see it in this report.
Okay.
So yes, I'm presenting to you information from the last 10 years up to date today as a mix, but bear in mind, as mentioned in the last response, that there's bias here, and the bias is that it's data that's shared by all of the contributing organisations in the report. So yeah, you'll have a mix.
Time for one more question. It's Tim right at the back.
Hello there. Quick question really is, what kind of confidence do you have that the actual origin of the attack is those countries, and not simply that they're the easiest to tunnel an attack through, perhaps having weaker security or infrastructure? For example, Romania, perhaps it's actually easier to attack and go through via them to shield your actual origin. How do you know that the attack originates from there? Do you do more than IP source checking?
So, I mean, I can't speak definitively on behalf of every contributing organisation. So I guess in that regard, we don't have control over the level of attribution that each organisation has. So I can only speak on behalf of the Verizon investigations team, where, as I mentioned, we go through multiple points of attribution to before we will list out a country as being responsible. But I mean, what I'd point out here is that this number on the bottom here is 398 out of 621 confirmed breaches. So that is the number where there's been a reasonable level of confidence in terms of attribution. It's not the total. So almost half the origin of the attack wasn't able to be determined or without any level of confidence. But having said that, I mean, I think in most cases, investigation companies are looking at the evidence, and they'll often not be able to see much more than the where the attack has come from. But I think it's very important to not get hung up on where the actual hands on the keyboard are, so to speak. If you see, for example, in this report, that the majority of espionage-related attacks are attributed back through, if they're getting tunneled through China, it doesn't really matter so much where the hands on the keyboard are. You've got some really good information here that that type of threat is coming through China, whether it's being tunneled through there or whether the origin is from there. At the end of the day, you've got some information you can actually use and do something with. So I think I hear a lot of the arguments about saying, well, how do you know that they're actually there? They could have hopped through 7 proxies like Snowden and could be anywhere. The point is that where they pop out at the endpoint and attack your network is really useful, important information. And so I think that's what is useful to take away from this. Usually in payment card related breaches and other financial investigations, we see if attackers are coming from a country that they're not really going to get prosecuted and it's easy to do, they just don't care. And we can work with law enforcement to shut them down. And as I mentioned in Romania, we've had, with their inclusion in the UN, we've had some great cooperation from law enforcement and a lot of arrests. Yeah, I mean, I think the main answer to that is that we have a reasonable amount of confidence because we have these kind of standards we try and set with the contributors. But nevertheless, whether it's hopped through an intermediary like China or whether it's where their hands on the keyboard are, it's still useful information to use. You're never going to have like 100% confirmation on it because it's a forensic investigation, right? You can never get to that point unless, as examples as I mentioned, where you have Chinese language, you have Chinese keyboard characters. At that point, you start to say, okay, we're pretty sure it's Chinese. Otherwise, someone's going to a heck of a lot of effort for not really much point. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Mike.